Hi, I'm Harris Petch, and welcome to episode 8 of HP Talks. In today's episode, I speak to Craig Pinkney, a criminologist, youth work specialist, and founder and director of Solve. We discuss the challenges of youth work, the misunderstanding of young people in society, and delve deeper into the systematic issues influencing youth crime. Enjoy. Hi Craig, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Saturday looking gloomy where I am in the West Midlands in Birmingham. Hope it picks up, but I think that the happy thing about today is that the gyms are back open, so I actually can't wait to do a workout.
It's been a long time since you've been, 3 or 4 months now?
Yeah, it's been a little while. To be fair, I've been doing like little home workouts.
Yeah.
It's not the same, is it?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to get back to climbing.
I want the gym vibe in my gym bag, a big drink, and yeah.
Fantastic. So, just to start this off for everyone that's listening, can you kind of give a brief introduction of kind of who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm a criminologist, urban youth specialist, PhD researcher, and the founder of Solve, the Centre for Youth Violence and Conflict.
Fantastic. So what's when I kind of first came across you, there's so many multifaceted of like what you do, like obviously the founder of Solve, obviously you with youth working and the criminologist. It's quite a fantastic place to where you've come. What kind of initially inspired you to kind of take this route of dealing with young people and essentially helping young people and then going on to be a criminologist?
I think the inspiration comes from many different levels. I think the first and foremost is my grandparents. You know, they were quite significant in the Birmingham community in the 60s and 70s. They had started a community initiative where a lot of, young people that are, I would call my elders today, were community activists fighting against things like injustice, fighting against the social ills that specifically black communities were faced with, post-Windrush era. So I would kind of say like the community side to me is kind of in my DNA because all my aunts and uncles are invested in community. So I was kind of a child that kind of seen that. And I guess, you kind of find your own journey when you're a child and, growing up and being in school. And despite how coming from a good family, I still made very bad choices. I left school with no GCSEs and kind of started to do a number of things that I guess I'm not proud of. I'm not saying that, I was kind of at a height of any kind of criminality. But kind of it's the same thing that a lot of fine young people kind of finding themselves in, making a couple of silly bad choices and don't really know how to kind of backtrack and reverse and then go back onto the straight path. So I guess my earlier kind of youth work experiences, was working with young people, in a sporting context. Yeah. So working with a number of organisations that were using sport as a tool to kind of deter young people from criminal exploitation, gangs, and any form of criminality. And then I would kind of say that when I had a number of mentors that I was engaged with at the time, there was always like, you'd be a good youth worker. I kind of wasn't feeling it at the time, I must admit, but when they started to show me some numbers, I've always been a person that's interested in numbers. Yeah. So when they kind of told me what the salary was, and this was before the cuts, when youth services actually really got some funding to do work. And then, it's kind of kicked off from there, went on a few training programs, a couple of courses, and then a year later I applied to go to university. I went to the Montfort University, Leicester, done my degree there, came back, got my first youth work job in Birmingham, working for Birmingham Youth Service. Did that for a few years, and then whilst I was working at that centre, I find myself engaging with young people that were involved in a range of criminal behaviours, and I wanted to ask the question, why was I witnessing many young people, despite with all of the positivity that we were giving them, the opportunities, the educational opportunities, the recreational activities, taking them away on trips and whatnot, why still were they getting involved in criminal activity? Why were they still becoming victims of some sort of gun or violence related to knives? And that's what kind of birthed me wanting to go into criminology and then go into that world to kind of help understand that from a theoretical perspective. And then I would say after doing that, I would say that kind of really opened the doors into enabling people to kind of understand how I think and create up with models and approaches that can effectively impact young people at that level.
That's a fantastic story. The way that you've, like, kind of said, where you've come from. You've been in this situation, which many of the people kids that you maybe deal with every day are that, and you are not only a role model there, but you're a carbon copy of essentially this is what it can be. Just because you've made a few silly mistakes, as we all do when we're young. At the end of the day, you're young. You try and experience the world for the first time at these early ages, and you just simply make mistakes. And I think one good key point that you referenced there was like the initial starts with the money that youth workers weren't. Are we seeing a bit of is it still attractive being youth worker at the minute? Is it is it quite a lot of people who go into that role, or is there a bit less of supply at the minute?
I think what the key issue is at the minute is because there's a lack of funding around youth services and youth provisions. A lot of graduates that I've taught are kind of struggling to be like, well, what do I go into? However, my response to them is always, one of the things they need to be thinking about is being a little bit more creative as well, because youth work is very different to working with young people. I always work with young people, but when you're looking for youth work, that's the problem. And I think that's also a problem of the system in itself. When we're talking about education anyway, doesn't really teach people how to be self-sustaining, doesn't really teach people about business, it doesn't really teach people about creating something in order to benefit the people, but also economically being strong at the same time as well. So what I find is that a lot of people go into other roles because they're thinking that by doing just a degree in youth work, it's going to land them a youth work job. And one of the things that I've always been creative and able to do is kind of create jobs for myself that involves working with young people and kind of do it that way. And I think if more people are more creative in their approaches and engaging with children and young people, I reckon, like with the kind of array of different charity organisations and initiatives nationally, I think that mindset is really good, but collaboration is also important. So in connecting with individuals that have similar ideas to you, but also enabling them to support you in getting to that next stage or that next journey.
I think what you said there, the aspect of trying to create stuff and be creative and create jobs, that's only evident by what you've doing with Solve at the minute. Can you explain what Solve is and what do you do there?
So Solve, in a nutshell, is in a kind of a very easy way to put it, is kind of Craig in a nutshell, with all of the mass multifaceted things that I'm known for and what I do. That's ultimately it. So youth work is what we do. Specific and detached youth work, known as on-road youth work, is the philosophy that I've created. So that is kind of a street-based project that we do. I also do training and development, is what kind of a lot of people also know me for, what I do nationally and internationally, and advisory and consultancy. We're also advocates for families and young people that find themselves in violent situations. So, for example, there may be a shooting in a local community where a family feels at harm or threat. We can step in and support them and talk on their behalf to housing associations, with local police and so on and so forth, that we can get a move that would protect them and make sure that the children are safeguarded.
That's fantastic. I think what's one key element that I like there, and I think because you are working on the front line, but I think with these kind of issues there needs to be systematic change in order to benefit the actual problem. And one thing, so you doing talks to different people nationally and internationally, and from when I was looking at the website, you do talks with loads of different types of people, from police and legal commissioners to councils to social workers. Do you see quite contrasting attitudes towards young people and youth crime from these different organisations when you're talking to them?
It depends on the organisation. I would say that each organisation has a different aim and objective. You'll have those passionate organisations, passionate individuals within those organisations, but you'll also have organisations that it's kind of a tick box exercise.
Yeah.
And I'm sometimes not convinced that the individuals that take up the training are as passionate as I am. But what I do, when I deliver training, I don't look at it from that perspective. I look at it as, if I'm able to reach a number of people within that training, can that be effective? So even if it's an organisation that is historically known for treating people, or people perceive them a particular type of way, am I able to reach individuals within that group that can make them change their practice? For example, like the police. You know, local communities may say they don't like the police, but there are police officers that actually want change.
100%.
So can I reach that individual? And that's my mindset when I engage with different types of entities.
It's great to see how you work with that as well. You're quite obviously you're very passionate what you do, and you can see, you know, that in the way you're doing it. It's hard not to see what you do when I've watched a few videos and kind of get in with that as well, to see how passionate it is. I imagine that you've been very effective from what you're doing, but obviously it's a bit harder, you know, from different organisations and different people. You're not going to convince someone straight away. One thing I'd like to kind of address at the minute, so I sent you these earlier, so with the aspects of, for anyone listening, these are the statistics regarding from the youth violence in the UK from 2018 to 2019, Youth Justice and Board Ministry of Justice. So when I was looking at these as well, and statistics, but I want to kind of delve a bit deeper into them from someone who's the front line and can see, you know, because you can paint statistics in any picture that you want, message that you want to give. We see it all the time. So from these, what I saw was 21,700 children were sentenced. This is an 83% decline from 10 years ago. 4,500 offensive weapons committed by children. So we see, and this is a down from 10 years ago as well. There's been an overall decline from these statistics, what we've seen. However, we're seeing kind of these authoritative measures and discipline measures, so that's all been taken that time. So the average custodial sentence length for children has increased from 11.4 months to 7.7 months. The number of children remaining in custody has increased by 12% to last year, and the reoffending rate is slightly higher compared to 10 years ago by about 1%. Now, these statistics portray that these authoritative measures essentially are working, and this is the thing. But when you do a bit deeper research, it seems like that's not the right answer. Can you kind of explain what are other factors that have maybe caused this decline in the past 10 years?
Well, I think sometimes as well, when we look at statistics, it's important to understand the quantitative and quantitative statistics that oftentimes get thrown out. I don't think that when you look at surveys and it just gives numbers of individuals, it tells a true story. And that's why I'm kind of interested in that qualitative approach, because then you actually get the opportunity to not only see the numbers, but also to get those live experiences from individuals that may be affected by forms of criminality. And I guess you're totally right when you look at, you know, certain statistics. It depends on what question you're asking. I think that's also a research thing as well. Is that, you know, you may look at kind of like violence, but then what specific violence are you talking about? So you may say, oh, there may be a decline in, for example, violent activity to relate to knives, for example. But I guarantee if you was to probably look at knives as it relates to street activities, that actually may be necessarily an increase. So that's kind of the kind of jargonistic statistical research stuff that takes place. But I guess just to kind of answer directly to your question, I think the systemic factors doesn't oftentimes get acknowledged when we talk about statistics. You know, when we're talking about poverty, the impact of poverty, talking about deprivation, talking about the impact of dysfunctional families, the lack of opportunities, high unemployment. We're looking at issues like institutionalized racism, systemic racism, the fact that some communities are dealing with trauma, intergenerational trauma, you know, adverse childhood experiences, you know, and the list goes on. You know, there's so many different kind of what I call the motivating or the factors in which cause or create environments for these things to happen. Oftentimes they kind of get kind of sidestepped. So then what you have is scapegoating that takes place. So the scapegoating is very easy to say things like, well, it's the music that's making kids violent. It's the games that make children violent. It's the music that makes young people violent. And whilst all of those have some substance, it doesn't tell you the true story. Because I think that when we do scapegoating and blaming only one reason for the perpetuation of violence in recent times, it takes us away from the conversation to talk about poverty. Because I reckon if we spoke about poverty and we spoke about wealth and we spoke about the haves and the have-nots, it would give us probably a clearer picture why some individuals from certain environments that may live under the poverty line may be doing things in order to survive. And when you're coming from an elitist perspective, it's very hard for you to understand why somebody would go to a local supermarket and steal tomatoes and steal apples if you've got these things readily available for you all the time. And that's not a justification to say why and condoning why an individual would do that. But what it does do is it gives you a lens in which enables you to kind of see why people would behave in a particular type of way. Because when you then start to look at those particular lenses, it helps you to then understand why people behave in the way that they do. But I would like to take it a stage deeper, because when we talk about criminality and violence, we also have to talk about the reality and the fact that the Western societies as a whole are violent societies. You know, when we talk about things like empire, and we talk about spaces that have enabled their spaces or societies to be great, was done through violence and achieved through violence. So we know that violence is in a facet it's embedded in every facet of society. You know, you can look at cartoons, you can look at games, you can look at drama series, you can look at soap operas, you can look at music, fashion, and all of these technological things that are happening. Everything has an aspect of violence within it. So we can't then just look at young people and just be like, oh, you know, young people are violent and young people are involved in crime, when Narcos and Netflix make so many millions from its viewership, Ozark, Sons of Anarchy, Money Heist, and all of these things that we like watching make so much money off projecting violence, and we consume it, but then only blame the young people. So what I'm also saying is that we also have to hold accountable to a lot of these multi-billion companies that also profit off violence and criminality. And whilst that is being said, on the lower level, in the level in which we work, young people are custodians and consumers of the things that they get projected. So when I speak to a young person and he says, well, I want a pair of Louis Vuitton trainers that cost £1,200, why does he want a pair of Louis Vuitton trainers? Maybe because Louis Vuitton has marketed something towards young people, and it so happens that their marketing strategy is always in the communities that generally can't afford it.
Yeah.
And in those particular spaces, people will do things in order to get that. Now, we can say, you know, well, young people need to be more resilient, but does the education system teach young people resilience? No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
And I think that that's not just necessarily an education system. A lot of families as a whole haven't been educated to teach resilience. So we're told you go to school, you do your maths, English, science, and then your other curricular subjects that may be useful to your knowledge and understanding. But things like resilience in this particular time, how to say no. When young people or when individuals come to you with propositions that may be negative, how do you come out of those types of scenarios? Those things are not readily taught. So by having this conversation, what it does is it enables you to look at some of the systemic failures and factors, but also gets you to also look at the state of young people in today's society, in that environment, trying to survive. And then we've got COVID-19. So with COVID-19, you've got all of these increased vulnerabilities where young people are not in school. Some people don't have access to the internet. They don't have access to computers where they're able to be able to go online. Even if the school has provided them with some sort of technology, the software and the technology is not up to date. So you got so many challenges that people are ultimately faced with, even within COVID-19, that increases those vulnerabilities. And anywhere you find where increased vulnerabilities are, criminal entities are always going to exploit that. So when you look at then the rise of violence within COVID-19, you look at the rise in county lines during COVID-19, there is no kind of mysterious conclusion if you just do the math based on what I've just said.
Yeah, it's a very good point to make, with the aspect of what I've seen as well, just from like a general perspective. Once kind of lockdown has been lifted a little bit, and we've had numerous cases, I'm not sure purely about gang violence, but in other areas as well. We heard about the stabbing at Thorpe Park the other week, and then we heard about the one in the hospital, and then it seems like obviously there's been people that have been locked in their houses for a while. That's allowed gang now I'm not saying these are correlated at all, but I'm just trying to use this as a relative example. But and so we've had people that have been locked up for our criminal organisation being able to like prey on that and then build their ways to kind of profiteer from it, and then once everything's back to normal per se, then everything's kind of compensating for what happened before, and it's a very weird thing that's happening. And by having COVID-19 impacting, surely this is, in the horrible sense, is it kind of distorting all the work that you've done? Because I imagine when you're working with young people, it takes a lot of time to build up that trust, build up them relationships. And one thing that I found out when I was researching, which it absolutely baffled me, that youth workers are key workers. Now, how does that actually happen? Like these are the people that, right? Teachers are key workers, and they are helping bring the next generation up. Fantastic, yes. But so are the youth workers are. They're just not at the minute. They're actually focusing on people that are having issues or haven't had the best start. And you're saying that they're essentially, by saying that they're not key workers, it seems like you're saying that at the end of the day, then people don't matter as much. And I think that's a systematic issue that needs to be resolved.
And I think spot on, and I think you just kind of just nailed it on its head. And I think that has been part of the discussion since COVID-19. Or the announcement of the lockdown, ultimately, when it approached, the conversation was. See, fortunately, I've been doing youth work since the beginning of COVID-19 because my work with the National Youth Agency, they were writing the guidelines for detached youth workers to go out on the street. But whilst creating those particular guidelines, we were talking to local and national government about the importance of youth work and where actually youth workers stand in that. And I know a number of regions have taken up that particular opportunity. So, for example, I'm currently working in Norfolk, where from the beginning of COVID-19, there was like, yes, youth workers are key essential workers, and embedded that within their system. So I've been doing work with with children's services, in conjunction with yacht missing teams and whatever. And I've been doing it for quite fine, just utilising social distancing. And I think the good thing about working with young people is that young people are quite creative and spontaneous, just like youth workers are. So rather than meeting in a building, we can go and meet in a local park. We can actually go and walk on the street, and we can social distance whilst we're having a conversation. And I just think that the mindset of people around youth work, that also links to your earlier question as well, is that there's not kind of a range of radical type of strategies and approaches that youth workers are adopting to engage with people at different times. Youth work historically has always been one of the arts and philosophies that have been used to engage with young people and children in the most darkest times throughout history. And I just feel like whilst we're in COVID-19, youth workers also can operate in that same type of way. But I believe that it's because many have kind of fallen into the trap by default of traditional youth work, understanding only. Sometimes they can't see how they do that, but there's loads of organisations nationally that are still doing youth work, and I would just say that they've been made invisible. So whilst we know that youth workers are key essential workers, I agree with your point that nationally it's not recognised as being a key and essential workers, and just as school teachers, youth workers are just as important.
You made a good point just then, which I'd like to think because I've seen videos that you've talked about, and the aspect of being made invisible. Now, that's an important part of essentially why young people may turn to crime or may turn to gangs, because of their organisation, their close circle that they're in at the minute. They're made to feel invisible, and that's. Could you expand on that a little bit as well? Because you talked about when kids made to feel invisible, they essentially go and try to be made to be seen.
I think when we go back to the original point that I made earlier about when we look at kind of the systemic factors of society, young people feel that they're so marginalised and alienated within that society. And in a society that they feel that they're unseen and unheard, in order to be heard in a range of environments within that context, you have young people doing things in order to have that visibility. And that visibility, oftentimes when we talk about popular, dominant youth cultures, currently is always something quite negative. So if they do something negative, they're finally going to be seen, they're finally going to be heard. And I know that sounds very strange and odd, but when I work in schools and, work with predominantly good young people that are socially included, that are engaged in their education, and I have conversations with them, they say things like, you know what, it's just so hard to be good right now. It's a lot easier to be bad, because they recognize that the moment you mess about in school, you may have a mentor, you may have someone come from outside of the school, come into the school to do some work with them, and they seem like they get a little bit more attention.
Yeah.
So if you're a good kid that's functioning quite high and getting all of the kind of academic accolades that school may offer, you look outside of the window and you see a young child engaging with somebody like me, doing grappling and boxing in the playground.
Yeah.
I would want a piece of that too.
Of course.
This is one in my earliest career. I never forget this, and this is why I've changed my approach when I do stuff with schools. But I was called in to mentor one particular young person. So one of the things I do is kind of martial arts to engage with high impact sports to engage with young people. So it's not necessarily just I do martial arts, but anything around high impact sports, wrestling, whatever it is, high impact, to engage young people when they kind of are very hyper masculine and quite aggressive. I believe that it's important that we utilize high impact sports to potentially engage with some. But anyway, to the point, I was in the playground, I had all my pads out, I think I had my punch pads, my kick pads out, and I was making him do like a little bit of the circuit, and he absolutely loved it, getting out all of his aggression and getting out all of the things that he said, and we would have conversations in between about how he feels, and then we'd go right back at it. And I remember looking to the side and seeing all of these school kids from different year groups looking out the window, and I couldn't help but feel sad, because all of these kids are thinking, wait there, we're all well behaved, or we're all doing what we're supposed to be doing, but the naughtiest kid is getting all of this attention from you.
Yeah.
And that's my point. So young people recognize that by default, when they engage in negative behavior or deviant behavior, people look at them and they give them credibility, they give them respect, they give them that kind of accolade in the streets, on the road, they're kind of seen as popular individuals that are associated with individuals that also may have popularity within particular area codes and regions. And that's why the reason why you find the vast majority of kids that are not necessarily involved in anything wanting to engage with those types of individuals. And when we talk about increased vulnerabilities, even more so you find those scenarios with those individuals. So when I work with, for example, children's services, I hear the same thing every day. Craig, we're concerned about a young person. He hasn't done anything, or she hasn't done anything, but they're hanging around with somebody or a group of people that everybody's concerned about. And that's what I'm talking about. So young people know that if I can hang around with that young boy or that young girl that's well known for all the wrong reasons, then I'm going to get seen, and people are going to start knowing who I am, and people are going to start saying, hello Craig, how you doing? And no one to say hello to me before, and now all of a sudden, because I'm connected to somebody else now, everybody else now wants to be around me. And that's what young people ultimately see. So when we talk about solutions and engaging with children and young people, it's about enabling them to be visible, enabling their voices to be heard. How do we do that? We involve them in the things that we're doing. Too often we have conversations about young people and don't bring young people in. Too often we make decisions about young people or for young people without including them in. So I think young people are a voice, and one of the things that I pride my development on is understanding that young people are our teachers and young people are my teachers. So if I want to know anything about slang, music, fashion expressions, popular culture, I use the young people that I see either in my family, young people that live on my street, or young people that I engage with from time to time to find out what's new, what's relevant. So I don't need to necessarily read any book or look at a resource that's going to give me that idea, because I can get it real time.
Yeah,
and I think these are the things we've stopped doing.
Yeah, I think it's weird, like the way that you spoke about that. I've never thought about it, about the kids seeing, the other person getting the extra attention. I'm thinking about being a kid now and thinking, I remember feeling like that. Like it's a weird thing that you think, and you don't understand how because everyone's got short memories. Like you remember being a kid, but you grow up, don't you? And, like you have hormones, and you don't remember like how you kind of felt at that time. And I think what we also have as well is, I think what we've seen from, we start to, like, as society, kind of criminalise childish behaviour. You mentioned, like, loitering around, and it could be, it may come from good intention, may come from bad intentions, but a group of kids in the park, or hanging around outside a shop, it probably happens every day. Someone's, they're hanging around here, and and then the police come over, and then that's when that's happening, and you're not doing anything wrong. This is just childish behaviour, being loud, or wanting that attention. And they might not be necessarily doing wrong. It might not be what someone else wants within the local community, but by doing that and getting the police to make them think that's bad behaviour, you're essentially kind of giving that attention still there, and then also making them feel like a criminal. And then it seems like you're just essentially creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you're just making them exacerbate more into that kind of behaviour, and then someone else comes along and sees that, who may have not the best intentions, and then think, and then they give them that little bit of attention. It could be from a gang. It's like, do you know what, if you go do this job for me, I'll buy you a pair of trainers. And then, like, it turns on the flip. So while you're kind of working with someone to kind of get the best out of them and getting their feelings out, they're getting that one-to-one attention from there. They're getting the maybe, like, something that'll help elevate their status, maybe materialistic wise. And it can just go easy the other way. And
I think one of the things that is missing as well is that being young is all about risky behaviour.
Mm-hmm.
I think people forget that we were all young people at one point, and we did risky things. When I was young, it was more like things like being on the train track and playing tig and tag. Now my parents will be thinking, why the hell would you be playing that game on a train track? And they could give us all of the consequences of what might happen, but when we were playing, we weren't actually thinking about that. It was more the thrill. So with all of the things that you've just mentioned, take away the fact that it's negative, that's actually quite exciting. The police chase you.
Yeah.
Everybody knows you for an individual that's been chased by the police. The police have arrested you, they've kept you in a cell for a few hours. You've had that whole experience. Can you imagine a story when you come out of the police station, when you meet back with your friends? You know what happened? Yeah, we got chased and that guy almost got tasered. It sounds like an exciting story. The point that I'm making is young people and the construct of their brains is a certain way until they get to a certain age anyway. So all of these things about trying and testing and not looking at consequences is not necessarily something that is the main priority of their thinking. As we get older, we've got so much to lose, so our logical thought process always kicks in when we think, okay, I like going on the ride, but I remember reading a media article about what happened at Drayton Manor. I'm not sure about that one. And you think about all of the things that can happen, and you make a very logical decision about what it is that you want to do. Young people don't think about things in that way. They look at the thrill first, consequences are last. So that's also a very key insight into the solutions around educating children and young people. Because what we tend to do, again going back to my original point, we use very traditional models of engaging with young people. Tell them that they've done something wrong. Tell them what the consequences are, with the hope that they're going to be like, okay, I'm not going to do it no more. No, what you need to do is give them that real life experience of, I understand exactly what it's like to be your age and what things that you go through, but I'm just letting you know that these are the things that could happen. And if you make those choices, this is also what happens. And I've actually got a series of individuals that I work with, or case studies, that can tell you what will happen when you get to that stage. So you're kind of almost giving young people foresight into a journey that gets them to see that if they make these series of decisions, these are the things that ultimately can happen. And I think that that's what's ultimately missing. We just go straight into talking about consequences. And I think this is where youth work is amazing, because youth work is informal, it's spontaneous, it's creative, it's about creative thinking, it's about democratic and inclusive practice, and all of those different kind of multifaceted tools and mediums to engage with young people is used at one particular time. And that's why it's important. And going back to your last point about essential workers, and I think that's why young youth workers have always been key when engaging with young people. And that's why young people say, I prefer working with my youth worker than working with anybody else, because they don't follow a traditional lens of ultimately how to do things.
It's a really fantastic point, and it speaks volumes to come from someone from you as well, who's done the practical side and is on the front line all the time, and then has also done the research and the academic side, and can stress out of both avenues. Both avenues are important. They help pioneer the research, but obviously the frontline base is where you're learning the actual real stuff, and that's what's helped learning that, like you said, speaking to young people and not seeing young people as just someone there and something to talk to teach, but as actual teachers and how to pioneer new methods to go forward. And I think that leads to kind of my next question, because you're a very forward-thinking guy, and it's only exemplified by what you said today. And you've already spoke about just telling them of the consequences. What outdated approaches are you seeing at the minute that are essentially just not helping but are being stuck with still?
I think it's also about the knowledge of the youth workers. So I created an approach called on-road youth work. And in that particular approach, I talk about that youth work practice meets criminological theorizing. That individuals that are on-road youth workers function from an insider perspective, that seek to understand the life experience of the individuals that they work with, that come up with approaches that are able to be adapted to engage with individuals at that particular time. So whilst I talk about the principles of on-road youth work, there's key things that I highlight, things like language, understanding the concept of language in different contexts, how young people talk, what are the popular cultures, the dominant cultures within the environments in which you live. I talk about social capital. I talk about visibility and the importance of visibility in an environment where you seek to engage with young people. But I also talk about knowledge, and when I talk about knowledge, I actually break it down into a series of segments. So knowledge in the context of agenda. Do you understand what the agenda is around young people and engagement? So if you're talking about deterring young people from county lines, do you even know what county lines is? Are you sure that the young people you're engaged with understand the word county lines? Because if you're doing something and they don't understand it, then clearly you're not functioning at the right level. Knowledge of history. And when I say knowledge of history, in the environments, where did the conflicts and the beefs start between different postcodes, different groups? Who are the key families? Grassroots knowledge of who lives in that environment in those regions that you actually can pinpoint to. So I function and try and make sure I know most of the families where I'm engaging. Knowledge of interventions is also very important, because then that forces you to look at contemporary models and not just looking at historical ones that you may have graduated and learned 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, some people 15 years ago. So when you kind of break knowledge down in those particular segments, what it forces the worker to do is be reflexive, not reflective. So it forces that worker to put the mirror in front and say, what is your positionality? Are you best placed to engage with young people politically or socially with the issues that they're ultimately faced with? And what happens is there's a lot of workers that are doing things, and I don't believe that they're very clear. So when you're talking about approaches, most of the approaches are outdated because people ain't looked at contemporary approaches in order to engage with young people. Perfect example, I was doing some work just quite recently, and I was with a social worker, a support worker, working with a young person, and they wanted me to basically mentor this young guy. And I asked him a question, do you even know why I'm here? He smiled and said, nah, not really. So I started to speak about concerns, and I said, one of the concerns that came up was the issue of county lines. And I said, do you know what county lines is? And he went, no? And that's the point. But that same young man, I was probably in 3 or 4 meetings with this young man talking of everybody in the conversation talking about county lines. But the young man that's been engaged by different services all of these weeks before I've shown up, not one person's actually sat and said, do you even know what county lines means? But they're utilising these terminologies, assuming that young people know what they are. So when I explained to him what county lines was, he's like, oh, trapping. Because they use a different word, and that's the point where going back to my original point about language. So if you're not invested in understanding young people and looking at their worldview and their lens, then any approach that you adopt is not going to be effective solely on that basis that you lose young people before you've even come to the door.
That's a massive important point. You see that as well, and it makes so much sense, especially when someone from like yourself is explaining it. and you've got people at the top making these, making decisions that everyone on the on the front line, like yourself, is like, well, this isn't going to work, and then they just do it anyway. The kind of increase in stop and search is an example, which pretty much everyone's saying, right, okay, maybe police officers maybe saying, oh well, no, it makes us feel safe, and then you've seen people like, well, it just makes us feel worse, and youth workers like, this is not the way, and there's other ways. I think one way which I do find quite interesting, you mentioned it earlier, is, I don't know if it's a brand new concept, but it seems the concept of detached youth work. Could you kind of explain what this is and how this kind of different solution is actually helping young people?
It's just one approach to engaging with young people. Detached youth work has always kind of been the foundation of where youth work ultimately started. The idea that you take young people to where young people are at, you meet them in spaces where young people feel comfortable, and you provide them with a range of services, ultimately where they ultimately feel comfortable. So when we talk about detached youth work, even the concept of on-road youth work comes from detached youth work. It just builds on the shoulders of the concept of detached youth work in a range of different ways. So I go out and meet young people. I don't have the perspective of young people have got to come to my building, young people have got to come to my centre where there's activities taking place. And I think detached youth work has had a long history when we talk about youth work practice in engaging with young people in a range of different types of ways. It's a style of youth work that I feel fits the type of young people that I engage with, because the type of young people are not going to sit in a building, they're not going to sit in a workshop for an hour, because they haven't been in education for that long anyway and didn't do well in education. So I need to think very creatively of how I'm going to teach young people in an on-road street context, and give them the same amount of information as that young person would be in the building. So that's where social media becomes really important. So we can like things like this, we can break up segments of these types of conversations and actually send them to young people in a 2-minute, 3-minute. It gives them that quick knowledge, that quick understanding. So when we then interact with them, then they can have conversations informally on the concepts that we've ultimately mentioned. Because the reality is, a professional is going to sit and listen to this feed for an hour, but is a young person going to? Some may, but not all. But I can guarantee it's going to be more impactful if we use segments of the talk and use it on Instagram where all young people are, and knowing that they're going to listen to it via Instagram, as opposed to thinking that they're going to watch a whole 1-hour YouTube video. And it's funny because I said this to some youth workers the other day. We did an amazing event. The event was absolutely amazing. But on YouTube, it was 3 hours long, so nobody's going to watch it.
Yeah.
So no one's going to watch it. As amazing as it is, nobody's going to watch it. I said, why don't you just chop it up into 30-minute segments, 20-minute segments, and the most important parts and the most impactful discussions? Because then people are going to, and then straight away they're like, oh, I've noticed that people are watching. Because no one's watching. As soon as you click and see 3 hours and see an hour, only certain type of people that are going to look at that. People say I'm boring, so I'm going to watch a 3-hour session. I'm going to watch an hour session, a 2-hour session. But I don't think all young people are going to be doing that. And this is not speaking down on young people, but you have to think young people are creative, they're quick thinking, and technology is growing in a way in which everything is given to us very fast, going straight to the point. So our way of youth work, whether it's detached, whether it's outreach, whether it's centre-based, we have to be up to the time. And this is what on-road youth work is all about. It stays with the time of where young people are at. It forces the professional to come out of their comfort zone and bring youth work to where other young people are at. So whether that happens to be on Instagram, whether that happens to be on YouTube, whether that happens to be on Snapchat, wherever that may be, we bring youth work to young people, and don't sit there thinking that, oh, we've done an amazing event, we'll put it online and just think that young people are going to watch 2-3 hour videos when they're watching 2-3 hour music videos, 2-3 hour gaming individuals on YouTube, and enjoying that process 10 times more. That's getting millions of hits.
I think it's an amazing point what you said, because I'm quite similar to you. Like, I like listening to the long version. I think you see this a lot with kind of podcasts, of just the demographic of people that actually listen to podcasts, and it's quite, because they're quite, some are long, some are short, but the longest you see a lot of people, young, not really, it's from like 20 onwards, and it's not, doesn't really capture the young people as much. And like you said, with the rise of technology and the aspect of having instant things straight away, it's even happens with me with certain things. If I don't like something, like within 5 minutes if I'm watching it, I'm so easy just to be like, yeah, no, that's not for me.
You know what you're watching at the time, yeah?
Yeah, and that's the thing, and you have that more, and you've already mentioned some examples, but have you kind of got any other ideas or solutions of how you'd like to have technology and social media help improve youth work?
I think that I'm seeing loads of different creative ways currently online and how people engage with young people. I'm seeing things like Instagram lives, which I've never really seen before, with youth workers and young people talking about their issues, where loads of young people are on a particular feed, and that youth worker brings in different young people to have a conversation. And I think it's good because, one, those young people have the opportunity to speak, and I'm sure when it gets put on something like YouTube, we're talking about visibility again. So this is a perfect opportunity for those same young people that probably would have never been on an online platform before.
Hi, it's Harris here. Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but unfortunately when I got to this point, I had some technical difficulties which led to part of our conversation not being recorded. However, I felt the following conversation that me and Craig had was too important to cut out. So, I'm going to play the rest of it and just add a little bit of context. We moved on from discussing how technology can help youth workers to eventually moving on about the aspect of white privilege, the misunderstanding of it, and its impacts in society. Enjoy.
Even though you may have had a hard life, that privilege that's also classist and racist will still put you above an individual that looks like me. And until we understand that, that's not saying that we're not going to get treated the same, but understand that I'm still going to be 7 times more likely to be stopped and searched by compared to my Irish friend. Yeah. I'm still going to most likely get a harsher sentence when I come into face with criminal justice system compared to my Irish friend. I'm still going to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act and potentially get given harsher drugs compared to my Irish friend. And we can look at all facets of society and see that ultimately happened. So it's not a blame game, but it's about understanding that through that privilege, individuals are able to get a better start at the race in this thing called life than other individuals. And I think that that's what this time has enabled people to do, to have that conversation more about, why do I feel guilty? Where does that guilt ultimately come from? So when we look at the work of Professor Angelo, and she wrote that book called White Fragility, she talks about why those feelings are ultimately there. And I just believe that through those conversations, it enables us to see the world through a different lens, and goes back to exactly what you asked me about young people, about being reflective. So we want to be reflective when engaging with young people, but why can't we be reflective when we're engaging with people of colour? Why can't we be reflective in other elements of any isms that exist within our society? And I believe that that's where the change ultimately starts.
I think and it's not like there's elements of success through history with this. The apartheid, with the ending of apartheid, was all destined to be an absolute bloodbath and an absolute shit show, and everything was going to go and tear South Africa apart. South Africa's not in the best place at the minute, racism is there, but it should have been a lot worse. And instead what they did was, right, we need to get everyone to come together, say what they did, get it off their chest, and then speak. And once you do that, there's more steps of moving forward, compared to, like you said, just you might feel white guilt and then you don't want to speak about it because you don't want to be, you don't want to be racist, but you don't understand that this view or this background that you may have put these ideas in your head, or maybe brought it up to think a different way. And until you have that conversation, until you speak to someone who has been in that position, you don't understand it until then. And I've had it with my friends, and I've had one of my friends, he's from Zimbabwe, and he's said things to me, and it's like, and I didn't think about it until he pointed it out to me. And once I understood, it's like, right, okay, that makes sense now that someone said it to me, of how they feel, and you understand it compared to if you just read it off somewhere or you're seeing it in a short message. Then it's not as impactful, and we all need to have that conversation to help move society forward and to help hopefully remove this systematic racism from society. It's been amazing speaking to you, Craig. Thank you for coming on. I generally do think you are an outstanding human being for everything that you do. And thank you for coming on. I've just got one last question, and I ask this to everyone, is that if you could give a bit of advice to anyone about anything, what would it be?
Read, talk, and understand. I think in the current climate, they're the three things that I would ask. Read, understand, and have conversations. I say, as a black man, I'm not looking for the sympathy of white people. What I'm looking for is for people to understand my lens and understand my plight, and use your position of influence to support me in that plight. And I think that's it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I think I've loved having this conversation as well, because I've learned so much from you. Not even just about youth work and how this thing, but even just the last 10 minutes what you're speaking about. It's been fantastic to speak about it. Thank you for coming on.
No, you're most welcome to that.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, feel free to subscribe and share, and give the show a 5-star rating on all the podcast apps. If you want to find out more about Craig and his excellent work, you can follow his Twitter @RealActionUK and his YouTube channel, Craig Pinkney. Thank you.